starting up and actually using the toolkit for the very first time. And then also someone going into the toolkit and you already have client data stored in the system, and you already have kind of a flow of going into the system. And the second concept that we're going to talk about is kind of the flow of going into the system after we update the data. So after we update the data every quarter, what's the process that you would probably go through in terms of pulling data into the system, updating notes, looking at your watch list decisions, and that kind of process that you would go through. So we're kind of going to flip back and forth a little bit. Hopefully you won't get too confused, but and hopefully, more importantly, I won't get too confused. But we're going to kind of think about those processes as we go through the toolkit. So the first step, I think, and the first couple minutes we're going to take is someone going into the toolkit for the very first time. What are the areas they need to think of when they go into the toolkit for the very first time and jumping in and starting to create clients and create reports in the toolkit. So the very first thing that we actually get questions about an awful lot is just going into and updating your own information. So the information that you will see on a client report. And real simply, you'd click on the account admin link at the very top of the page. And then on this page here, and I'm in a demo account, so the data will look a little funny, but you're going to click on this My Contact Information. And this is the page where you're going to update the information. All the information shown here is going to display on your report. So this is a very important page if you need to change your name, add any designations like your AIF designation per se. This is where you want to go in, type that information in, and then all the information here will display on those reports that you're going to begin creating for your clients. So one quick item to get out of the way there. The next area that you may start to look at, and again, this is more revolving around reports because a lot of the areas that you'll eventually get to are actual reports that you're going to generate for the client. But the next area you may want to start to take a look at is in the settings area. We're going to talk about a lot of these, but I'm going to focus on the reports first. And there are three areas that you definitely want to take a look at for the first time, especially when you're getting set up. The first one is disclosures. So depending on the way your business is set up and depending on the information that you want to provide to your clients, you'll probably want to set up some disclosures that you want to use in your report. So this is a very important section. In here, we have a couple of examples. And as you can see here, I actually have 3 different disclosures stored in the system. And I can use the different disclosures for various reports throughout the toolkit. So again, you can create a cover page disclosure that will display on the first page of all your reports that you generate, and then a last page, something I'll fly through at the end. So again, if you need to disclose any information, if you just want to add information about your company in general to the last page disclosure, you can do that as well. But this is really something you need to think about and may want to add. And again, as I mentioned, I have a couple different disclosures here. So you may have a disclosure that works with a certain group of clients. You may have a disclosure that works with a different group of clients. Start to think about the way that you're generating reports, who you're generating the report for. Is there a certain type of client that you're generating a report for, such as a 401k plan, as opposed to an individual? Do those disclosures need to be different for those different sets of clients? And how would that work? So that's one important area to take a look at. And then less importantly, but by no means in terms of the presentation that you may want to show, are logos and color schemes. So either the logo or the color scheme. So you can go into the report settings area and set up those logos and color schemes that you want to use for your reports. So going in here, creating different color schemes. Again, if you have a different business line that you want to create this blues lineup as opposed to a corporate color scheme, you can go in and build that, and then kind of build that information into the toolkit. All right, so we'll talk about report templates real quickly, but we'll come back to this, especially, again, when we're in the client area talking about creating client information. The last area you may want to start to take a look at, just get a good sense of, is the report template area. again, if you're not familiar with the toolkit, this is where you can actually build different templates using the different report sections. But we'll cover this in more detail. And you'll be able to use the color scheme, logo, and disclosures as we go in and build the report templates. All right, so taking a step back and looking at the tools menu, the next area we're going to focus on is lists and models. We don't cover these lists and models a whole lot in our webinars, but I think they're very important in the way that a lot of people use the data in the toolkit, not only client data, but also your searching and screening process. So the first area I want to take a look at is the My List and specifically this custom universe. Now this is pretty important, and I think for certain reasons, especially if you're working with different platforms. So again, we import client data, or not client data, but investment data, specifically mutual funds and ETFs from Morningstar. They provide to us a platform screen, if you will, called broker availability screen, and it provides a pretty handy way of pulling in different platforms, such as a Schwab platform or a TD platform, or I know there's other 401k platforms out there like a Census. That doesn't get covered though. So this is where you can come into the system and build your own platform and use this in the toolkit. One of the great features of this is the ability to quickly upload the information. So if I wanted to create a new universe, I can go in and create a new one. So I'll call this Mike's New Platform. And then I'll create that. And then all I need to do, I guess I already have one called that. Let's just call it Mike. Make it simple. All right, so I created my universe called Mike. And now all I need to do is upload an Excel spreadsheet. I have an Excel spreadsheet that has all the ticker symbols listed. And I'm going to upload this into the system. Some of my tickers aren't found. But now I have 294 investments. This could be 300 investments. This could be 11,000 investments. However big or small your platform is, you want to think about the different platforms that you're working with your clients and consider how you can get those sources of data, specifically, again, in an Excel spreadsheet that you can quickly load into the toolkit and then update periodically as those lists change in the system. And again, we'll see how this comes into play when we're doing some searching and screening. The next area that we want to take a look at is a recommended fund list. Now I'm going to create a new list right now. I'll call it Mike again. Keep it simple. That's how I like to do things. And I've created this list, and this is a recommended fund list. This is my buy list or approved funds list. I'm not really going to do anything with it now, but as we jump into the investment analyzer, we'll see where this can come into play and help you to organize the information and organize your best list of funds that you want to use in the system. And one feature that I may want to add, now I'm doing it's kind of funny because I'm naming them pretty simple, but I may want to change the name. So this may be Mike under the Mike universe. So I can store that. I may create another list called Mike under the Schwab universe. So what I'm doing here is I'm naming the different lists for different goals that I may want to build. One, I may name it for different universes. So I may, and again, we'll see how this comes into play, but I'm trying to take that giant universe of 10,000 investments, and in the analyzer, which we'll see in a few minutes, I'm going to narrow that down to my buy list. So I may want to label the recommended fund list with something that I may call it, plus the universe name, or conversely, I may just call it the universe name, just on my buy list. All right, so I've set up the data for my lists. The next area we can jump into, and again, just another area to think about, is the models area. Now, we're not going to go into how to build a model too quickly, but this is where we can build that model into the toolkit. And we can do it, again, using our asset allocation optimizer, if you're familiar with that, going into the system and building a model. Or I can go into the system and simply find some peer groups that I like, define the allocations if I'm already using a different model or I'm using another optimizer program to build my models, and then store that information into the system. So what this will help me to do is build these models in the system. Let's delete some of these here to make it a little clearer. I'll need new model. But I have this conservative, moderate, balanced. I'm missing my aggressive. I have a 401k lineup. I'm building the models in the system, again, just on the peer group level and the asset allocation level, just to store this information into the system. And we can see where this information will begin to come into play as I build a client, as I build a proposal, as I'm working through different areas. The last two areas we want to take a look at are up in the settings area. One is custom holdings directory, and the second is the due diligence criteria. So custom holdings directory, again, this may be an area where you may want to, again, if you already know of a couple of custom holdings that you may need to use in the system, this is a great place to jump in and start to build those into the system, but it's not necessary. So just wanted to bring it up that, again, we only track mutual funds, ETFs, insurance group separate accounts, variable annuity sub-accounts, and separate accounts in the toolkit. If you know clients have investments outside of that data set, you may want to jump in here and do that, but we'll see how easy it is to kind of build the custom holding in the system right while you're kind of loading the client data into the system as well. The second area we want to talk about is the due diligence criteria. Now, a lot of people use the fi360 fiduciary score in their due diligence process, not only in their selection process, but in their ongoing monitoring process. And that's great. A lot of people use that. It's been built to kind of help a lot of advisors with that goal of creating a due diligence process. But again, a lot of people like to create their own custom due diligence. So if you are creating your own custom due diligence and systematically using that with your clients, you may want to jump into the due diligence area under user settings and build that into the system at the outset of your toolkit subscription, just to get an idea of, again, how that process works and how you can use that in the system. So I'm going to build my due diligence criteria in here. Again, I'm not going to go into that detail, but this is where you would want to jump in and build that into the system. A couple other minor areas that you may want to take a look at, but as we've kind of built the system, we've made it a lot easier to get to some of these areas. One is peer group benchmarks. You can jump in here and look at all the indices that are assigned to the different peer groups. So this is a nice area to jump in and say, well, how are the reports going to show large blend? What are they going to compare a large blend to? Well, by default, we're going to compare them to the Russell 1000. A lot of people may want to change that to the S&P 500. You can certainly jump in and do that. But you may want to take a look at this from time to time as we update this. And again, as you're jumping into the system for the very first time, just seeing what the default benchmarks are, pulling from the list of benchmarks that we have stored in the system, and changing that on a case-by-case basis if you need to show that information. Another area that you can jump into is the blended benchmark. Similar to those models, as you jump in and build the models, you may want to build the blended benchmarks for comparison purposes as well. Not only will these marry up with models that you're building in the system, but again, if you're working with a client who holds a portfolio, this is a great way to provide another comparison of their portfolio performance to one of these benchmarks that you've stored in the system. So again, kind of thinking about all these different areas and knowing where they are to jump in and build them at the outset or as you're going through and customizing your reports. All right, so all that random stuff is going to somehow come into play, and we're going to start through that process by jumping into the investment analyzer. Now, again, this is the investment analyzer. We're going to start searching on our fund and ETF universe. But as we jump into the universe, let's think about some of the goals that we may have. One goal may be to build a buy list or approved funds list. Another goal may be to find a specific fund for a client. So the way that we would typically want to do that is by taking this list of results with almost 25,000 investments in here and starting to narrow that down in some form or fashion. So the first kind of goal that you may have is thinking about that universe of investments that may be available to the client. And that's where our custom fund universe comes into play. So if you already have that custom universe stored in the system, we can scroll down here to the bottom and then select that cool Mike fund universe that I built and jump that into the analyzer. Now we have 294 investments. And then the second thing we're going to think about is our search process. So again, our search process may be the fiduciary score. If it is, we can just select that fiduciary score, move it over, and then change the threshold to whatever we need it to be. An alternative, again, is our custom due diligence. If we're using our own due diligence set to screen investments in our implementation phase, in our selection phase, we can jump over to the right-hand side now and pull up our custom due diligence. So I had, let's see, our M&D advisors. Let's see what comes out of this. Can add that over and actually reset our list, but let's go down and jump in at our listing again. Oh, and we do have some funds there. Good. So really quickly, again, we're using our custom fund universe to preset and pre-screen the list of investments that we have in the toolkit down to the list of investments that are just available to our clients. Again, based on the different platforms of investments available to the client. So we've done that. We've added our due diligence process. And then finally, again, we may be fine with this list. What we can do now is click on the View Results. And then from this list, we can sort and screen the information. We may want to group it by peer group. We may look at the fiduciary score. But we're going to analyze this information. And again, we may start to think about what we're going to do with this data now. So this is the data that came out of our search. It's pre-screened on our universe. It's pre-screened on our due diligence. What can we do with this? Well, one thing that we can do is pretty quickly produce some reports. So again, if you're looking through a process of replacing an investment for a client, say they need an intermediate term fund here, we can look at this list here. There's a couple different investments. They actually happen to all be the same investment, but based on the share class, we can select that investment and we can produce a report. So pretty quickly we can go through that screening process of selecting an investment and producing a report, or maybe a couple of different reports to show a client some suggested alternatives for their existing portfolio or plan. Another alternative is to store this information in the toolkit somehow for reference when you're building a proposal, or just, again, an internal reference of information that you may store in the system. So to do that, you may want to use a recommended fund list. I already built my Mike universe, so I can search and screen on and find that universe, and then I can select those two investments. Maybe there's a couple others here that, again, based on the reports that I've generated and the analysis that I've done, say these I need to add into my recommended fund list. I can add them in, and now they're stored in my universe, or excuse me, into my recommended fund list, and now I have that information stored in the system. So again, the idea of taking your analysis that you're using in the investment analyzer and actually doing something with it, creating a report, creating a list, and pulling that information into somewhere useful is kind of the goal in that exercise there. The next concept we're going to think about is creating a client in the system. And the creating a client in the system can have kind of two different, this is really kind of where the creating the client in the system for the first time and then updating the client information ongoing, where this kind of really comes into play, and we're going to split that up in this example here. So this is an example where we're first going to go and create a client in the system for the first time, and then we're going to go back and pretend that it's a correlator and see what happens in the system as the data gets updated. All right, so we can go into the system, and we're going to create a new client in the Toolkit. And we're going to create Mike client. And we're going to create Mike in here. Click on the Create button. And this is our brand new client stored in the system. So this is the client that we have. And from here, there's a couple different jumping off points where we can begin to add information before we want to generate a final report for the client. The first step, and I think the most important, is going into the basic information. So we really only filled in a couple fields when we created the client for the first time. But this is where we want to jump in and add other client information, such as information on the name, the address, committee members, or anything of that sort that you may need to add, third-party details, and then storing that information in the basic information. The next area we can jump into is jumping in, obviously, into the actual client portfolio. We're going to skip over asset allocation for just a second and jump right into the investment policy statement. Because in here, we can jump in and begin to add information. So in here, we may need to define some of the background pieces. Let's keep it a minimal or an individual, along, so on and so forth. Save that information. Jump in here. And again, this is where our information that we've already stored comes into play. If you're using the fiduciary score, great. If not, you want to use your custom due diligence. We just need to select that in the system. Any other miscellaneous information we may need to add. And then defining the asset allocation. So again, we can jump in and add the asset allocation, but if you've built models in the system, we can define the portfolio in terms of the asset allocation, and somehow that did total 100, but we'll fix that and store that in the system. So now we have our strategic model stored in the system, our custom due diligence, our other information, and we can jump off and produce that investment policy statement that we can introduce to the client. The next area we can jump into is holdings, and again, this may be a place where some people spend a lot of time, but hopefully there's a couple different ways that you can load information into the system without spending a lot of time. The first area I want to quickly point out is the Excel upload, and this is a very convenient way to upload information. All you need is to download the information into an Excel spreadsheet in some form or fashion, and then load that into the system. You need the tickers in column A, the dollar values in column B. And if we pull up, oops, I have a line up here. That's not going to work too much, but we'll just load that line up here and just show that the investments get loaded. The dollar values would get loaded if my spreadsheet had dollar values in the system. So that's loaded into the system, great. If I need to add a custom holding, I can jump in here and add my custom holding, let's say Fourth Avenue Company stock, and now that's stored in the system as well. So I've entered everything into the system and stored that information. I can jump over and look at the expenses if I need to, and then finally begin to run my reports. So again, let's talk about reports now. And again, we're going through this as a user in the system for the very first time. Now, as I jump into the system as a user for the very first time, I'm not going to have this list of custom report templates here. So I'm going to need to think about how I want to build my report for my client. So one way to think about that is to just actually go into the system and produce a monitoring report first. This is a standard fi360 Toolkit report, and this is a great report because it covers a lot of those different areas that you may want to cover with your client. However, a lot of people find the report to be lengthy, or maybe it may not contain enough information. Depends on the client that you're working with and how you flow through the presentation and what type of data they want to look at. So to handle that, what you may want to do is pull up your monitoring report and leaf through this again for the very first time just to see what you may want to include. And one thing right off the bat you may certainly want to include is the cover page, the table of contents, perhaps one of these performance summary sections, Actually, there's 3 of them in here, but let's just think about one for now, and then this holding summary. So let's start off with building a report just with that information. What we can do is create a new report template. And we can give it a title, so we may want to call it the monitoring report. And then we want to select the template type. We're going to select a client template type, the portrait, whether it's portrait or landscape, the color scheme, which we've already stored in the system, our logo that's already stored in the system, and then any other customizations that we may want. And now that we've built this custom report and added some features, we can again jump back to our monitoring report and again think about the sections we want to add. So we wanted a cover page, we wanted, what did we want? We want a table of contents. Oops. And we wanted one of those performance summary sections to broad market, and then we wanted a holding summary. So that's our report, plain and simple. And now that I built that in the system, I can run that report, and it'll be stored in the system. And it took me only a couple minutes to run through that process. But now I can go in and use this report that I've built in this client, and I can actually use this for any client now. So that's where I think it's a good idea to actually go into the system and build a client before you build your first report template, because I think you want to get a sense of what the report is going to show. And the best way to do that, besides just pulling up a sample report, is actually pulling in client information and showing that in the report. So that's what we've done there. One other thing that we may want to talk about right now, and it's certainly helpful in the context of the report template, is the different types of report templates. And there's 2 main types. One is a client report, and the other is this investment report. And when I created my report, I had the option to choose one or the other. And this is pretty important because the way that you choose this template type changes the way and the location of that report. One thing that you may want to always think about, and the way you may want to label your template, is just by adding some information into the template name in terms of the template type that you select, the layout that you select, or any other customizations that you may add. So I may create a monitoring report. And again, this template name is only internal, so only you can see it. But I may have this again, a client report, and it may be landscape. So a couple of things, a couple unique identifiers that help you to know what you're building here, because when you're displaying this to a client, it just may be monitoring report. One other thing you may want to add, and I'll just remove this client, is the type of report that you're building. So 401k, if I'm building a report that's customized for 401k clients, I may want to include that in my report template name. So when I create my report, and let's just jump back here. I know, again, I've already done this for this first example here, but I know now that this report is built as a monitoring report for 401k clients. And as I'm jumping in here into this client, I know that I'm working in a 401k client. I can quickly produce that report as opposed to a monitoring report that's built for portfolios. So naming the report template in a couple different ways to help identify the way that that report is being laid out and who that report is being built for is helpful in terms of the way that you build reports in the system. All right, so let's go back to the main page here. Let's see, question here about asset allocation. We have a question here about asset allocation. I'm going to defer on that just to kind of move through. It's a good question, and we'll talk about that in just a short while towards the end. So good question that we can pick up here in a few minutes. All right, so what's my goal here now? So I built my client in the system, I ran all my reports, and I'm good to go. What happens when we update the data? Again, we're updating the data on a quarterly basis in the toolkit. We'll be starting to provide monthly data. So if you like to produce monthly reports for your client or just produce reports that has a current month end on the data set, you'll be able to do that here in the first few quarters of 2012. But again, in the interim, we're going to update the data on a quarterly basis, and kind of what should you think about doing in terms of client interaction and updating data in the client. So the first thing that you can think about doing is going in, and let's find my client here, and jumping into the system. Now, in terms of creating a new portfolio, that may be something that you may want to do just starting off the bat, creating a new portfolio to show historical information. So we have all these different periods here that I can jump in and add. And I'm going to create a portfolio on my old data period, and now I have one on my new data period too. But I'm doing this just to give you an example of what's going to happen in terms of what's going to happen the next time you jump in. Because the next time you jump in, you're going to have that new data period. So that new September 30 data period coming up in a few short weeks, you'll have the December 31st data period. That's going to automatically be created in the system for you. The old data periods are going to be archived, and then all that information is stored in the system for you. So all you need to do is jump in and click on that Edit Client. So I just wanted to cover that real quick. But why did I create that old period? Why would I want to create historical periods in the system at all? Couple reasons. One, we just came out with a couple new reports that'll show historical information. So you may want to utilize those, add those into your report templates. But two, again, as you build this history in the system, you're going to be storing all the watch list information, all the notes, all the historical nature of the due diligence processes that you've been storing in the system. So anytime you want to build that history in the toolkit for a client, you can create a new portfolio and then build any of those quarterly portfolios in the system. The easiest way to do that is just copy from an existing data period. So being able to do that in the system is very valuable. But once I've created this new, but again, let's check back, and again, we're going into the system as a new data period. This new period is created for me. My old period is archived. So again, presumably, I've already updated all the information, stored that information in the system for my client. So to jump in, really there's only a couple areas you really may want to take a look at. You may want to take a look at the asset allocation. You may want to review the investment policy statement just in terms of have any of the objectives changed over time. If you've added expenses, you may want to jump in here to see if any of the expenses have changed, but this may be something that you only really look at annually. But really the holdings area is where you want to jump in and look at this information, because this is where a lot of the changes are going to be made. The first and most important change that you're using is the change in investments. And the way that the investments can be changed and updated is both, again, on the addition or removal of investments, and then most importantly, the change in dollar value. And this is where a lot of people spend a lot of their time going into the system and updating this. So one of the ways that you can hopefully make this process a little less painful is if you jump into the individual client, is using that Excel spreadsheet to upload and update information. So using this Excel spreadsheet, you can update the information and then quickly update the ticker symbols, update the dollar values to what perhaps a custodian platform provides, or any of the software reports that have that other information. Two important things to keep in mind, or actually one important thing to keep in mind, is down here in the way that you're uploading the data. Excuse me. The way that you're loading the data is that you can decide to keep the information shown on the page down below, or you can remove it. If you keep it, if there's any investments not in the Excel spreadsheet that are in your client list, they're going to be kept in the system. The other ones are going to be updated. Or you can start fresh and remove everything. And what that's going to do is essentially wipe out this list here and then replace the client lineup with just the investments in that ticker or in that Excel spreadsheet. So this is great if, and a simple way to do things if, again, you know that the lineup that you have in that Excel spreadsheet is going to map into the system 9 times or 100% of the time. But one reason, and the reason we have this as a default, is because of custom investments, SMAs, IGSAs, investments that don't have a unique identifier in the Excel spreadsheet. We don't want to wipe those out. So what you obviously want to do is upload it with the keep feature. It's going to upload all the mutual funds, and then if you do have one custom investment, one custom stock, you can update that individual in the system. So that's one great way to jump into the system and upload holdings in the toolkit, going into the system and jumping in each client and uploading the data. A more efficient way to do that, and one that we hope you'll start to get a lot more use out of, is the data import. And again, this is a kind of a work in progress as we add this feature and begin to kind of work on the way that we'll be importing data in from other data sources. So one question that I have for everyone, again, if you have a few free minutes, feel free to email me at mike@fi360 and let me know where do you get your data from when you're entering information or uploading it into the toolkit. Is it from a custodian? Is it from a portfolio software application? Is it from our CRM system? Where does that come from? Because we want to be able to import that information into the toolkit. One of the things that we've started to add is an Excel or an XML import. What an XML file is it's a unique data structure in terms of identifying investments, similar to the Excel spreadsheet, but it's laid out a little bit differently in the way that our system can read that information. We're currently able to upload XML files from a variety of sources, and they're all listed here, mainly coming from Morningstar. Morningstar has kind of it's not necessarily a standard that I'd call it, but they have their structure, again, that XML structure is standard across several different applications, not only Morningstar Principia or Morningstar Office, but also Schwab Portfolio Center and Money Guide Pro. And those applications can export data in this structure that we need to be able to read that information. So with that in mind, if you're using any of these applications as it stands, feel free to take a look at some of the sources of information that we have on the left-hand side. But what you'll be able to do from any of these different areas is export that XML file. It's not an Excel file, it's an XML file. And then load that into the system. And one of the nice features of this is that you can load more than one client at a time. Now, I don't know if I actually pulled down my sample that had more than one client, but I have this XML file, and I think I just uploaded one. But what I can do is load that, and just imagine for a second if there was more than one client name listed here. So you can use that XML file to upload one single client into the toolkit, or 5 or 10 or 15 clients into the toolkit. If those clients are all stored in that XML file. So from here, what we can do is, again, line up the client name stored in the toolkit, or stored in an XML file, to the client name stored in the toolkit. Line those up. There'll be a drop-down for each of the clients, and then you can line that up. One easy way to make that process a whole lot easier is to ensure that the client name stored in that other data source, whether it's Morningstar or Schwab, is titled the exact same way as it is in the toolkit. Because if I had a Pete participant in my toolkit, that would automatically pull in Pete participant in this drop-down, and then I wouldn't have to do a thing. If I had a Pete participant, an Irene individual, a Cliff client, and they were all labeled in that XML file and all labeled in this file, all I'd have to do is click on Import, and that information would all be pulled in and updated in those 3 clients, or in my example, this one client here. So I had a couple failures in there. Let's see what those are. So a couple bad tickers in there. I think that was one of my test files, so apologize for not getting something that's a little more relevant to what you would typically see. But these 3 investments that I pulled in from that file, if I go into my client now, are all stored in here. So those 3 investments plus that custom holding. So all that information, and you may be able to see it here, the dollar values got pulled in. All that information came from that file that I downloaded from Morningstar or Money Guide Pro or Schwab Portfolio Center. And then I could easily update 1 client, or I can update 50 clients in the toolkit. So again, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to find out exactly how you're using data in different sources and find ways that we can pull in data, not only in this XML file, but actually connect with other software providers to be able to do this even more seamlessly, being able to use, type in your username and password and seamlessly sign into that other area and manage that information. All right, so I've updated the data, and maybe I just want to jump into the reports. That may be where all I need to do, go from holdings to reports and produce a report. Again, I can produce that 401k landscape report that I've created. But before we jump in too far, I just want to talk about watch lists and notes. And before I run out of time, I just wanted to say that, again, the watch list and notes area that we're managing here is just for this individual client. We can see that these watch list decisions are being made for this client, and we can jump in here and make watch list decisions for that client, overriding these monitoring criteria decisions. But again, with the toolkit, hopefully we have an area that will make that process a little bit easier, and that's manual decisions. So with this manual decisions page, what we can actually do is make those decisions globally, and then all those decisions will flow back into that client area. So again, before or even right after you upload the client data, before you jump in and review the data or run a report, definitely take a look at this manual decisions page, because this is where we can update the data. Now, I've already made several decisions in the system for this data period. Again, this data in this manual watch list decision area gets updated quarterly as we update the data. Because what's going to happen is, if we jump into this area, after we update the data at the end of December, you're going to jump in here and there's going to be nothing at all. This is going to be a blank slate. So one of 2 things you can actually do. One, you can, just as always, go in, do your due diligence, and type in a couple of funds that you may want to manage and make a manual watch list decision for. Maybe there's only a couple that you typically work on. Or, again, people like to make those manual decisions across time from period to period. So the important thing to think about is this copying the manual decision and copying from the old time period to the new time period. So let's say from June 30 to September 30, we can copy those time periods, and then that's going to overwrite everything stored in the system and copy those manual decisions that you made last period into this most recent period. Once we've copied over those manual decisions, one area other area you may want to take a look at is the watch list summary. Now I'm going to kind of talk quickly here as we pull up this information because this takes a few seconds to go through. But after you make those manual decisions, and at least copying over the manual decisions that you've made in a prior period, again, what I encourage you to do before making any client decisions individually in that client area is go into this watch list summary area. Again, this page takes a minute or two based on the number of clients that you have stored in the system. But this will give you the entire data set of information that you would want to see for all those manual decisions. And it'll help you to make manual decisions across all of your clients without having to jump into that individual client one at a time. So hopefully this will just take another second or two to come up. But again, the process, I think, is to go in, upload the client information into the toolkit for the most recent period, go into the manual decisions area, and if you want to copy those manual decisions from the prior period, go ahead and copy those old manual decisions and then adjust as necessary. And then finally go into this watch list area. And again, this will be an area that will actually show more than just one investment, but it may show a whole list of investments depending on the filters that you add. And then from here we can make some decisions. So again, I just have one investment, but we can pull up this investment, see which clients it has on watch, which clients it has off watch. And then we can go in here, review those decisions. Again, make manual decisions from this area if we want to. And then lastly, add any notes into the system that we may want to. So if there's something in particular that you may want to type in as a note, we can jump in here and make that note for that investment. And then we're all set. So the last section that we want to jump into after we visit the watch list summary area is those investment notes and review that across all the notes in the system. So we've gone to the watch list summary, reviewed those watch list decisions, and made some notes in the system. And now we can go into this investment notes area and review the notes. So why would we want to review the notes in this system? A couple reasons. One, in this notes area, we can store the notes historically. So one area that you may want to obviously visit is the notes that are being displayed in your report. So if I pull up this note here for this investment here, 3-to-1 diversified equity, I see that this reported note is displayed in a couple different areas for a couple different time periods for a couple different clients. I may want to start turning some of this information off just so I can store this information in the system and make some more mental notes of what's going on. Again, I'm not deleting the notes from the system because we don't want to do that. We want to store them in the system just so we can have them on a historical record. We may have created one new note for the entire investment, but then we've added all these other notes, edited the notes, and gone back and updated all the notes for all the investments that we have in the system. Maybe we are deleting some notes just for that investment. All right, so we've made our manual decisions. We've reviewed our watch list for all of our clients. We've managed our notes, made sure that we have all our notes stored in the system. And then we could jump back in and create that report for the client. But really what I want to do is, again, in terms of efficiency, let's use a batch report. So again, we're creating batch reports to handle our reports instead of jumping into that single client and uploading the data. So let's take a look again. We're created this batch. And again, thinking about those reports that I've created earlier, I created reports for different client types. You can build batches for different client types. So maybe you want to split things out differently for the different client types. But I've created a batch for the different client types. I can just jump in here, and after I made those, updated the holdings, updated the decisions, updated my notes, I can just jump in here, and if I've already built a batch, I can run that report. So let's see. this wasn't a good example. Let's find one other example. So again, in here, I've selected my batch, my reports. Let's run this one. Well, it's waiting. It's thinking. All right, so again, I think that we're running short on time here. But again, the process that I was going through as a client, reviewing the information, jumping into the client, reviewing the manual decisions, reviewing the watch list summary, reviewing the notes, and then running this batch. Let me see if I have anything here. All right, good. So these are my reports that can be generated. And let's see if I get this 401k should be complete. So, all right, so I've run my batch. My batch is complete. I've jumped back into the toolkit maybe 20 minutes later, maybe half an hour later. And again, I have all these reports that I can pull up if I want to. But really, I can just download this zip file, and I'll just open it for example's sake, and dump this onto my computer, where I can run the reports or email the report to the client, however I want to make that decision, printing it out, using it in the client meeting. Well, that's not going to open in time. But again, I'm actually at the point now where I have the reports that I'm showing to my clients, and I've produced those reports in the batch environment. Many of those reports, some of them or many of them, may have a watch list decision stored in the report. If I scroll down towards the bottom of my monitoring report, one thing that I think is pretty important is this watch list action items section. So again, these are notes that you're storing in the system. So these are different from the investment commentary that you're storing in the system, because these are the final decisions being made in that meeting that you're having with the report in front of you in terms of a PDF or a paper document. So again, it's important to document those meetings, and to do so before the meeting may not be prudent. Again, you may want to document an outline of what you want to talk about for each investment. But I think it's important to take those meeting notes, whether you wrote them down or documented them somewhere else, and take those meeting notes, and again, either on an investment basis or probably more specifically on a client-by-client basis, take those meeting notes, jump back into the client area, and before we close up shop for the current quarter for our client, we're going to jump back into the holdings area and document those investments that were on watch and the notes that we created. So we can jump in here, create a new note, and again, we're going to switch this to the watch list and type in our final watch list decision. We're going to make that just for our client here and display on the meeting date of today. So again, now what we have stored in the system is any commentary that we have, but then also the final meeting decision that we made for this investment from the last meeting. So when we jump into the system and create new commentary and store this information in the system, we can actually jump in here and maybe switch this over to investment commentary and document that final watch list decision that we made last period. If there are any changes that need to be made or updates, we already have that stored into the system, stored in the notes area that we can add into our report for the next quarter. Well, hopefully I've given you some ideas on kind of the process that you may want to go through on a period-by-period basis. Again, as a new person in the toolkit, and then going into the client area on an ongoing basis. There are a lot of other things that we kind of skipped over but I think that'll give you a good overview of some of the features that are certainly available, and how you may want to manage your the information going into the toolkit over time. So again, with that, I'm going to wrap it up today. There's a couple questions here, so I'll jump in on those questions. But if you have to jump off, I thank you for your time today. I certainly appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thank you.